The telegram arrived on a Tuesday. 3 words that would unravel everything Judy thought she knew about herself. She was in London when it came. The Palladium had just released her from an afternoon rehearsal, and she'd returned to the Savoy with that particular exhaustion that fame demands, the kind that settles in your bones and makes you feel ancient at 43. The suite smelled of roses someone had sent, though she couldn't remember who. There were always roses, always champagne, always people who loved her desperately from a distance that felt like miles even when they were standing right beside her. The bellboy had handed it to her with apologetic eyes, as if he knew what it contained, as if everyone knew but her. She tipped him too much. She always did. Then she stood in the center of the room with the yellow paper trembling in her hands, and she read those 3 words 7 times before they began to make sense. Dorothy was real. No signature, no return address, just those 3 words that split her life into before and after. She laughed at first, a high, bright sound that didn't belong to her at all. It was the laugh of a girl in a gingham dress, of someone who believed in rainbows and ruby slippers and the idea that home was something you could click your heels and find. She hadn't been that girl in decades. Maybe she'd never been that girl at all. But the telegram sat there on the Louis XVI desk like an accusation, and the longer she stared at it, the more the room seemed to tilt. Dorothy was real. What did that even mean? Dorothy was a character. Dorothy was Kansas and tornadoes and a yellow brick road that led nowhere except back to the beginning. Dorothy was Louis B. Mayer, telling her she wasn't pretty enough, wasn't thin enough, needed pills to stay awake and pills to fall asleep, and pills to forget that she was slowly disappearing even as the whole world watched. Dorothy was the thing that made her famous and the thing that made her a prisoner. She poured herself a drink. The champagne was flat, but she drank it anyway, standing at the window watching London move below her like a gray river. Somewhere down there, people were living ordinary lives. They were buying groceries and kissing their children goodnight and sleeping without sedatives. They didn't know what it was like to be loved by millions and known by no one. The phone rang. She let it. It rang again and again. Finally, she picked it up. "Judy, darling, you missed the fitting." It was Roger, her manager, his voice tight with the particular frustration of someone who'd been disappointed by her too many times to be surprised anymore. The gown for tomorrow night's performance. They waited for an hour. "I'm sorry," she said, though she wasn't sure what she was apologizing for. The fitting, the telegram, the fact that she existed at all. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine." "You don't sound fine." She looked at the telegram again. The paper had creased where her thumb had pressed too hard. "Roger, do you remember when I was Dorothy? Really Dorothy, I mean. When I still believed in all of it." There was a pause. She could hear him thinking, calculating how much truth he could afford to give her. "You were 12 years old, Judy. Of course you believed." "No," she said softly. "I don't think I did. I think I was pretending even then. I think I've been pretending my whole life." "Get some rest," he said, and she could hear him giving up on her in real time. "I'll send a doctor if you need one." "I don't need a doctor, I need—" But she didn't know how to finish the sentence. What did she need? The truth? To go back? To understand why someone would send her a telegram that made no sense and perfect sense all at once? She hung up without saying goodbye. The evening dissolved around her. She ordered room service and didn't eat it. She ran a bath and let it go cold. She stood in front of the mirror and studied her face. The face that had launched 1,000 magazine covers. The face that had cried and laughed and sung its way into America's heart. It was a stranger's face. It had always been a stranger's face. At midnight, she made a decision that felt inevitable, as if it had been made for her long before the telegram arrived. She would find out who sent it, and she would find out what it meant. The next morning, she called a private investigator. His name was Bernard Webb, and he had the kind of voice that suggested he'd heard everything and been surprised by nothing. She met him in a tea shop in Bloomsbury, far enough from the Savoy that no one would recognize her, though she wore sunglasses anyway and a scarf tied under her chin like a woman in a spy film. "Miss Garland," he said, rising when she approached. He was older than she expected, with silver hair and eyes that seemed to see past whatever performance she was giving. "Just Judy," she said, sliding into the booth across from him. She showed him the telegram. He studied it with the same careful attention a jeweler might give a suspicious diamond. No return address, sent from a post office in Brighton, paid in cash. He looked up at her. "Do you have any idea who might have sent this?" "If I knew, I wouldn't need you." He smiled faintly. "Fair enough. But I need to know what we're looking for. This, Dorothy, is it a person, a place, a code?" She hadn't thought about it that way. In her mind, Dorothy was still the girl from Kansas, still the role that had defined and destroyed her. But what if it was something else, someone else? "I don't know," she admitted. "I thought it was just someone's idea of a cruel joke, but the more I think about it, the more it feels like a message I was supposed to receive, like someone trying to tell me something I should have known all along." Bernard wrote something in a small leather notebook. "I'll need to know about your past, not the public version, the real one. Any secrets, any people who might have a reason to contact you this way." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Mr. Webb, my entire life is a secret. The public version is all anyone knows. The real version—" She trailed off, looking out the window at people passing by. "The real version would break their hearts." "Try me," he said. So she told him. Not everything. There wasn't enough time in the world for everything, but enough. She told him about the studio, about the pills, about the marriages that had crumbled under the weight of who she was supposed to be. She told him about the daughter she'd lost custody of, about the concerts she'd walked out on because she couldn't breathe, about the nights she'd stood on hotel balconies and wondered what would happen if she just let go. And she told him about the one thing she'd never told anyone. When she was 17, during a USO tour, she'd met a woman in a hospital in France, a nurse. Her name was Dorothy. They'd talked for hours that night while wounded soldiers slept around them. Dorothy had told her about growing up on a farm in Nebraska, about wanting to be a teacher, about how the war had changed everything, and Judy, young, exhausted, already drowning in a life she hadn't chosen, had told Dorothy the truth, about the pills, about the pressure, about how sometimes she felt like she was playing a role even when the cameras were off. "You're not Dorothy Gale," the nurse had said, smiling. "You're Judy Garland, and that's enough." It was the kindest thing anyone had ever said to her. They'd exchanged addresses. Dorothy had promised to write. But the letters never came, and eventually Judy convinced herself she'd imagined the whole thing. Another fantasy, another role she'd played to survive. Bernard listened without interrupting. When she finished, he closed his notebook. "I'll find out who sent the telegram," he said. "But Miss Garland, Judy, you should prepare yourself for the possibility that the answer might be more complicated than you want it to be." "Everything about my life is complicated," she said. "This would just be one more thing." He found the sender in 3 days. She was living in Brighton, in a small cottage overlooking the sea. Her name was still Dorothy. She was 61 years old. And she was dying. Judy took the train down on a gray Thursday morning. She didn't tell anyone where she was going. She wore the scarf and sunglasses again, but this time it felt less like a disguise and more like armor. The cottage was exactly the kind of place Judy had fantasized about during sleepless nights in hotel rooms. Whitewashed walls, a garden full of roses, windows that looked out at the water. The kind of place where you could be ordinary, where you could be free. Dorothy answered the door herself. She was thinner than Judy remembered, her hair white instead of brown, but her eyes were the same, kind and clear and impossibly sad. "Judy," she said, as if no time had passed at all. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "I wasn't sure either." They sat in the small living room with tea neither of them drank. The silence stretched between them like decades. Finally, Dorothy spoke. "I'm dying. Cancer. They've given me a few months, maybe less." She said it matter-of-factly, the way someone might comment on the weather. "I wanted to see you one more time before I went. I wanted you to know." "Know what?" Dorothy reached across the space between them and took Judy's hand. Her skin was paper-thin, her grip surprisingly strong. "That night in France when you told me who you really were, not Judy Garland, the star, but Judy, the girl who was scared and tired and drowning, you gave me something I'd never had before. Permission to be real. Permission to admit that I was scared too, that I didn't have all the answers, that sometimes I wanted to run away from everything and never look back." Judy felt tears building behind her eyes. She'd cried on camera 1,000 times, but this was different. This was real. "You saved my life that night," Dorothy continued. "Not dramatically, not like in a movie. But you reminded me that it was okay to be human. That strength wasn't about being perfect. It was about surviving anyway." "I don't feel very strong," Judy whispered. "I know, but you are. You're still here, aren't you? Still singing, still fighting. That's what strength looks like." They talked until the afternoon light began to fade. Dorothy told her about the years after the war, about the school she'd taught at in London, about the husband she'd loved and lost, about the quiet, ordinary life that had been enough. More than enough. And Judy told her the truth she'd been running from her entire life, that she didn't know who she was without the spotlight, that Dorothy Gale had become more real to her than Judy Garland ever had, that she'd spent 43 years trying to find home and had never gotten any closer than that yellow brick road. "Home isn't a place," Dorothy said softly. "It's not Kansas or California or anywhere you can see on a map. It's knowing yourself, accepting yourself, forgiving yourself." "I don't know how to do that." "Neither did I. But you start by admitting you want to. You start by being brave enough to be broken. You start by understanding that Dorothy was never real, but Judy always was." When Judy left that evening, Dorothy walked her to the door. They embraced, and Judy felt something shift inside her. Some weight she'd been carrying since she was a child, with a voice too big for her body and a dream that belonged to everyone but herself. "Thank you," Judy said, "for the telegram, for remembering me." "I never forgot you," Dorothy said, "not for a single day." Judy returned to London. She performed at the Palladium the next night, and something was different. She couldn't name it exactly, but she felt more present in her own skin, more real. When she sang "Over the Rainbow," she didn't think about the movie or the studio or the girl she'd been. She thought about Dorothy in her cottage by the sea, about choosing to be brave enough to reach out one last time, about the fact that sometimes the people who save us are the ones we don't expect. The audience gave her a standing ovation. They always did. But this time she let herself believe they were applauding not just Judy Garland, the legend, but Judy, the woman. Judy, the survivor. Judy, who was still here, still fighting, still searching for whatever home meant. 3 weeks later, she received a letter. Dorothy had passed peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by flowers from her garden. In her will, she'd left Judy a small package. Inside was a photograph. 2 young women in a hospital in France, 1944. One in a nurse's uniform, one in a USO costume, both smiling like they'd just shared a secret the rest of the world would never understand. On the back, in Dorothy's handwriting, "You were always real. Don't forget." Judy kept that photograph with her for the rest of her life, in hotel rooms and dressing rooms, and all the temporary places that passed for home. When the pills called to her, when the stage felt too big and the spotlight too bright, when she couldn't remember why she was still fighting, she would look at that photograph and remember. Dorothy was real, and so was she. The years that followed were not easy. Judy's life never became simple or peaceful or anything resembling ordinary. She continued to perform, to struggle, to rise and fall and rise again. But something had changed, some fundamental understanding about who she was beneath all the roles she'd played. She began to say no sometimes. No to the pills that made her someone else. No to the people who wanted her to be smaller or quieter or more manageable. No to the voice in her head that said she wasn't enough unless she was destroying herself. She started writing letters to Dorothy, even though Dorothy was gone. Long letters in the middle of the night when sleep wouldn't come. Letters about performances and failures and small victories. Letters about her children and her hopes and the person she was trying to become. She never mailed them. There was nowhere to send them, but writing them made her feel less alone. One night in New York, after a concert at Carnegie Hall, a young woman approached her backstage. She was nervous, clutching a program and shaking hands. "Miss Garland," she said, "I just wanted to tell you that you saved my life. Watching you tonight, hearing you sing, it reminded me that it's okay to be broken, that beauty can come from pain, that survival is its own kind of triumph." Judy looked at this girl, couldn't have been more than 20, and saw herself, saw Dorothy, saw every person who'd ever felt too much and not enough all at once. She took the girl's hands in hers. "What's your name?" "Emily. Emily, I want you to remember something. You're not broken, you're real, and that's the bravest thing you can be." The girl started crying. Judy held her while she cried, there in the chaos backstage, and thought about how strange and beautiful it was that pain could connect people across years and miles and all the distance that fame created. She thought about Dorothy's telegram, 3 words that had undone her and remade her all at once. Dorothy was real, and in being real, Dorothy had given Judy permission to be real too. The concert tours continued: Paris, Stockholm, Copenhagen, Melbourne. Cities blurred together like watercolors in rain, but Judy started noticing things she'd missed before. The way morning light looked through hotel curtains, the taste of coffee in a language she didn't speak, the faces in the audience who weren't just fans but fellow travelers through this strange, difficult, gorgeous life. She started keeping a journal, nothing profound, just observations, moments, small truths that felt like anchors. "Today I sang for 2 hours and didn't think about pills once. This is victory." A woman in the front row was crying during "The Man That Got Away." I realized I was crying too. We cried together. This is connection. I am 44 years old and I still don't know what home means, but I'm starting to think it might mean this: the moment when you stop running from yourself. Her children began to see the change too, Liza especially. They'd had so many difficult years, so much pain between them, but slowly, carefully, Judy started being present in a way she'd never managed before. She called when she said she would. She listened instead of performing. She apologized for the mother she hadn't been and tried to become the mother she could be. "What happened to you?" Liza asked one afternoon in Judy's apartment in Manhattan. They were having tea, something they'd never done before, something almost normal. Judy thought about the telegram, the cottage by the sea, the photograph she kept in her purse. "I remembered something I'd forgotten," she said, "that I'm allowed to be human." "You were always human, Mama." "Was I? I'm not sure I knew that." Liza reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Well, you know it now. Not everything healed. Some wounds were too deep. Some damage had been done decades ago and couldn't be undone with good intentions and late-night letters to a dead woman." Judy still struggled, still had nights when the darkness felt overwhelming, still made mistakes that hurt herself and the people who loved her. But she was trying, and trying was something. On what would turn out to be her last birthday, though she didn't know it then, she received a package with no return address. Inside was a small watercolor painting of a cottage by the sea and a note in handwriting she didn't recognize. Dorothy wanted you to have this. She painted it the week before she died. She said to tell you that home is wherever you decide to stop searching and start living. With love, Dorothy's niece, Margaret. Judy hung the painting in her bedroom where she could see it, first thing every morning, a reminder, a promise, a small piece of proof that she had been real to someone, that she had mattered not because of her voice or her fame or her legend, but because she was human and flawed and brave enough to admit it. She never found out how Dorothy had tracked her down after all those years, never learned what prompted her to send that telegram instead of a letter or a phone call. But it didn't matter. What mattered was that someone had seen her, the real her, the one beneath all the costumes and performances and desperate attempts to be whoever everyone else needed her to be. Dorothy had seen Judy, and in doing so, she'd given Judy the greatest gift anyone could give, the permission to see herself. Years later, when people talked about Judy Garland, they would focus on the tragedy, the pills, the failed marriages, the struggles and the sadness, and the way her life had seemed to spiral. And all of that was true. All of that was part of her story, but it wasn't the whole story. The whole story included a telegram that arrived on a Tuesday, 3 words that changed everything, a cottage by the sea, a photograph of 2 young women who understood what it meant to be real in a world that demanded performance. The whole story included the moment Judy stopped running from herself and started the long, difficult, beautiful work of coming home. Not to Kansas, not to any yellow brick road, but to the truth of who she had always been, beneath the ruby slippers and the spotlight, and the legend that threatened to swallow her whole. She was Judy Garland, complicated and broken and surviving anyway, real in all the ways that mattered, and that, more than any performance or any song or any moment of manufactured magic, was enough. It had always been enough. She just needed someone to tell her, someone to send her 3 words across the years and miles and all the distance that fame had created. Dorothy was real, and so, finally, was Judy.